Leprosy is Hansen's disease. At the time, they had no idea what it was. They knew it was infectious. And so if someone was diagnosed with leprosy, then there would be a solemn procession led by the altar servers, the altar boys, the priest of the village, and the person would be led with his family behind him. He'd be shown to the outskirts of the city, and he would be left a clapper. So he had to clap every time another person was in his presence and scream out, "Unclean, unclean." And when Francis returned to Assisi one day, he encountered the leper. And in that moment of grace, he realized that the leper was no different than he was. And that in his poverty, Francis was looking upon the Lord Jesus. And so he got off his horse and he went over to the leper and he kissed his hands and embraced him and gave him clothing. And that was the first time probably in many years where the leper had any human contact. And that, from that point on, Francis was on the road to extraordinary sanctity.
Okay, here we go. This is Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network. I'm Steve Lee, and it is my great pleasure, as always, to introduce Bishop Frank Caggiano.
Good morning, my friend. Good morning.
Hey, Excellency.
In the dog days of summer here.
Oh my gosh. At
Please.
least it's not as hot as it was. It was so bad
At the beginning.
Recently even.
Yeah, true. But where I just came back from my trip to Rome and Assisi with the seminarians and some donors who are very kind and generous to our seminarians. And it was a fantastic experience. And that's what I want to kind of unpack for everyone today. But
yeah,
hot. I mean, hot. I'm not exactly sure what English word I could figure out to use. It was unbelievable. Rome was unbelievable. And I lived there, as you know, and I've been in there in the summer, and maybe it's just that my memory is failing, but I don't ever remember it being that hot. And the churches, so we celebrate Mass at all the Jubilee churches, right? So St. Peter, St. Mary Major, St. John, St. Paul, all the rest. St. Mary Major, in the chapel, the side chapel, someone said the temperature was 88 degrees in the church.
Eee.
And of course, there are no windows. So I have never, it's a miracle that I did not completely dehydrate, I must confess. But stupendous, though. It was stupendous for the seminarians. About 9 of them, of the 34, had never been to Rome.
Oh, wow. You took 34 seminarians?
There were 34 seminarians, I think 12 or 14 donors, myself, and 3 other priests. So we were about 50 some odd.
Wow.
And it was just a tremendous experience. So you could see how their eyes were just wide open. And so what we did is we left on Sunday. We arrived on Monday morning. And then Friday morning, we left Rome to go to Assisi. Mm-hmm. And the trip ended on Tuesday, this past Tuesday. Now, I needed to come home early because of the death of Larry Bossidy.
Yes.
Who is just an extraordinary man, you know, from Richfield.
Yes.
So I came back to celebrate the Mass, and Bishop Barris preached, and it was a beautiful Mass, beautiful tribute. So they stayed 2 extra days than I did, but it's remarkable, absolutely remarkable. Now, you've been to Rome, Steve, no?
Yes, twice. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be a great Veritas pilgrimage to do.
Mm-hmm. Yes, let's do it.
Yeah, but that's a whole another story, another podcast for another day.
Right.
But this time, I did some homework. And I want to share some of the stuff I learned, because a lot of it, quite honestly, I did not know about Rome, both its ancient origins and the imperial city, as well as you go into Christianity. So, and it gave a whole different flavor to the trip, I must confess. But
did you do this homework because you were playing tour guide this time?
Well, no, because we had a tour guide who was excellent. Fabrizio, excellent. Huh. He was excellent. And he gave some very interesting perspective. No, simply because I thought to myself, I've been there so many times. I've lived there for years, and I never really took the time to figure out, like, what now almost I take for granted when I go.
Right. Yeah.
It was kind of neat to see the seminarians, some of them, their eyes wide open, because it's for me, going back to Rome, it's kind of like going home. And therefore, like going home, you kind of take a lot for granted,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So, so Rome is 28 centuries old, right? So the tradition is that it was founded in 753 BC by two brothers, Romulus and Remus, who, myth says, was raised by a she-wolf.
Right.
And the date of the birth date of Rome is the 21st of April. That I did not know.
Hmm.
And therefore, it is celebrated as a city feast. And it was first mentioned that that is its birthday in the 1st century BC, which means it was 600 years after it was founded. Right? But these are some of the fun facts. Rome at the time was a metropolis, right? It became the head of both the Republic for those 6 centuries and then the empire, right, with the emperors. Do you realize it was the first city to cross 1 million inhabitants?
Oh my gosh.
And it
Wow.
crossed it in the 2nd century BC. So 200 years before Christ was born, there were 1 million people who lived in Rome. Astonishing. The next city to cross 1 million people was in the 19th century, when London had 1 million people.
Wow.
Right? And they came from all over, from Europe, from Asia, from Africa. Now, the question is why? Well, Rome grew in importance, evolved in importance for two particular reasons, among others. The first was that it had an ample supply of water, fresh water, which was very hard to deal with. If you were going to have a significant population in one place, you need a number of things. Water is one. And if you've seen them, you go to Rome, if anybody's gone, you could see the aqueducts still exist.
Yeah, it's amazing. The engineering.
The engineering, like 25, 26 centuries old. Now, of course, they're not used, but they still exist.
Yeah.
And therefore, and you could see waters all over Rome, which I'll get to in a second, all over. And most of it is drinkable. So at the outdoor fountains, except for the decorative fountains, but they have fountains for pilgrims. And for the Jubilee, they installed a lot more to help people not to dehydrate. So that was one great. The other is trade. Trade. The Romans built 53,000 miles of roads by the 4th century. And those 53,000 miles covered the entire empire. And so Rome grew in importance because of its trade. It became the center of everything you could imagine. And because it's not far from the sea, and that the Castelli were by the sea, everything came through Rome. And therefore it became a cosmopolitan city well before the church was founded. And the interesting thing is, for the Romans, a mile was not 5,280 feet. It was 4,800 feet. And every 4,800 feet in the 53,000 miles, there was a milestone, a marker, throughout the whole empire. Similar to what's being done now. You know, for our listeners in Connecticut, you will notice soon enough that in the Merit, all the numbers are going to change. Because there was a federal mandate a few years ago that the numbering of the highway should match the miles from exit to exit.
Huh.
So I think it's happening all over the country. And the Merit is next on the list for us who live in Connecticut. So the Romans did that to 2,000 years before we decided to do it.
Wow.
So you could tell as you traveled the roads how far you were and how you went to. And therefore, the whole saying of all roads lead to Rome,
Yes.
That's where it comes from.
Yeah.
Right? So it had every ingredient to grow. And of course, so when the church was born, that is why Paul wanted to go to Rome. Right? That's why Peter went to Rome, because it was the heart of civilization. And the conversion of Rome would be the beginning of the conversion of the world to Christianity.
Right.
The other thing a city needs, which I didn't realize, was a complex sewer system. But I mean complex. And therefore, Rome was the first city in the world to have an integrated sewer system. And it goes back to the 6th century before Christ was born.
Wow.
Now, sewer system, it's not the sewer system we have now. I mean, most of it was open, it was ravines, but it transported the sewage out of the city to avoid cholera, right?
Right.
Pandemics of that nature.
Right. Stinkiness.
Exactly. Right, exactly. The other thing that I found interesting about Rome is because it was such a big trading city, it is the first city in history to have a shopping mall.
Oh my gosh.
See, we think Americans, we've created the shopping mall, but that's not true. The Romans did. And you know who did it? Emperor Trajan. And he did it in the year 107
Wow.
AD.
Yep.
And it was an outdoor market. It sold fruits, goods, vegetables, wares, spices. And to this day, whoever goes to Italy, the Italians love outdoor markets. Even in the heart of Rome, whether it's in Navona or sometimes it's even in Piazza Venezia, but now they can't because they're putting in a new subway, which is going to take 1,000 years to finish. So that's under construction. It's amazing. So even so for 2,000 years, but he was the first, and I thought that's kind of neat, right?
Yeah.
And then fountains.
Mm-hmm.
There are 280 fountains in Rome. There are 900 churches in Rome. In the city proper, 900 Catholic churches, excluding synagogues and Protestant churches.
Mm-hmm.
And the synagogue of Rome goes back to Peter and Paul. It is one of the most ancient, continuous Jewish communities in the world. And the Jewish families that live in that section of the city, many of them can trace their lineage back to the time of Jesus Christ.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
No. So what do you do with all these people? What do you do with them? Right? They work, and then, we're not talking tremendous law and order. The Romans were very liberal, accepting of a lot of different customs and traditions and even different religions, provided that you accepted the Roman emperor cult, that he was God. So you have your God, and yet that got us, of course, into martyrdom, because we obviously Christians, there is only one God, and that's it.
Right.
So they built amphitheaters, right? The most famous is?
The Colosseum.
Absolutely. Built in 80 AD. It took 8 years to build. It was mostly built by Jewish slaves, believe it or not. It held 85,000 people when it was completed.
Gosh.
It was built by the Emperor Flavian. And the Colosseum was built in such a way that it could be filled with water, so that you could have naval battles. No different that if anybody now goes to Piazza Navona in the heart of Rome, that too was once a pool. It could be filled with water and naval battles for the emperor and his cohort. So it was not called the Colosseum originally. It was called the Amphitheater of Flavian. It was Venerable Bede, it's a Christian, in the 7th century that called it the Colosseum.
Huh, interesting.
Right? And it's the site of tens of thousands of martyrdoms for Christians. So if you think about it, that which the Romans built to placate the people, to keep them occupied, also became the source of huge, huge suffering for Christians and believers. And that is a very sober experience. Anyone who goes to the Colosseum, this trip we could not go because there was not time. I would just simply suggest that you peel off from your tour group for just 30 or 40 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes, and just listen. And just imagine what that was like. And the roar of 85,000 people roaring for the death of other people. Very sad. for an imperial city that had such promise is extraordinarily sad. But the Colosseum was not the largest amphitheater in Rome. What was the largest amphitheater? Do you remember?
I don't.
The Circus Maximus. The Circus Maximus now is just an open field.
Mm-hmm.
But once it was an amphitheater. And anybody who tours Rome to go there, it's immense.
Yeah.
It's immense. It's immense. And archaeologists say when it was fully functional, it held 250,000 people in one amphitheater. So we talk about the stuff we build, like Giant Stadium or the Superdome. Nothing. That's child's play compared to what the Romans built, right?
Now there's a bunch of cats there at the Circus Maximus.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. And in Rome, remember, you had Roman citizens and non-citizens. Non-citizens had very few rights. Paul was a Roman citizen. And remember, when he was imprisoned, he appealed to Caesar,
right,
to adjudicate his case. And in fact, if Paul had not done that, chances are he would have been released, as the Acts of the Apostles say.
Yes.
But he went to Rome and, of course, ultimately lost his life.
Right.
But the toga, remember the toga?
Yes, of
We
course.
see it at Halloween come out every now and then.
Yeah.
That was the sign of a free man. That was the sign of being a Roman citizen, if you had the privilege to wear a toga. And women wore what's called a stola, which was the female version of the toga. And it was made by linen. That was another sign that you were a Roman citizen.
Mm.
Right? We talk about the fountains, right? Can I keep going?
Yeah, please.
So we talk about the fountain. Rome is called the city of fountains, right? By one measure, there once were 2,000 fountains in Rome. And again, what did they serve for? They served for water, all the water, right? They also served for washing, some of them, which you could imagine was a little bit odd for us, but you had to do what you had to do. Trevi. Did you go to Trevi?
I did, yes.
You did. So did you see all the people throwing in the coins?
Yes.
All right.
Over their heads.
All right. So did you ever ask why?
I did not. I wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. It was so crowded.
Oh yeah, and this now when we left, when we left on Friday, it was just the beginning of the young people coming to Rome. Assisi had lots of young people because the weekend of August 2nd and 3rd and 4th is the Jubilee of Youth, and they're expecting 1 million young people.
Yeah, my Annabelle is there right now.
Oh gosh, I hope she's drinking water. Although
I
actually,
hope so too.
But I heard that the weather was going to change for the better, which is great for the kids. But it'll be Pope Leo's first encounter with a huge youth gathering, which is
Awesome.
Stupendous. Anyway,
Yeah.
So people throw money into the Trevi because there is this myth that if you do it, that ensures you will return to Rome.
Right. Okay.
But you know how much money's put into the fountain every year? 700,000 euro.
Oh my word.
700,000 euro. It's cleaned on a periodic basis, otherwise it will clog. And all of that is donated to Caritas for the poor.
Oh wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, so next time be generous. Keep throwing. Right. So now, let's talk about Christianity in Rome. Right? So, with the martyrdom of the Roman martyrs, and most especially Saints Peter and St. Paul, the church found its spiritual home in Rome. So it was in the belly of the beast. And over the years, with all the evolution that has occurred in the governance of the church, from the very beginning, the constant was the Bishop of Rome. The Bishop of Rome, as the successor of Peter, has the ultimate authority in governance in the church, which means executive, legislative, and judicial power rests in one person. So it's astonishing, right? And we know the history of the church. We don't have to go into it, but I mean, there were high points and low points. Mm-hmm. But it's still, to this day, when you enter into Vatican City, and to think there's an entire country within the city of Rome, when you enter into that place and think of its history, right? And when you enter into St. Peter's, and as many times as you go, it is the largest constructed church in all of history. It's an amazing tribute to think that from the ashes rose the glory. And that itself is a sign to believers that there is both life and death, and life comes from death.
Yeah.
It's astonishing, right?
Yeah.
Very much so. So you've been to the Pantheon. Of all the churches in Rome, I've said many times, my favorite in beauty is St. Mary Major. And I was thrilled to be able to say Mass there. We also went to St. Lawrence, which is fascinating. And I had never celebrated Mass at St. Lawrence.
I don't think I've ever been to that church.
St. Lawrence has the remains of St. Stephen and St. Lawrence, the two deacon martyrs.
Uh-huh.
Stephen as the first martyr of the church, and Lawrence, you know the story of Lawrence, right?
Yes.
He was a deacon
burned.
of the church. Yeah, he was burnt alive. He was burnt alive. And the most beautiful lesson of Lawrence is that the prefect of Rome said he could spare his life if he brought him the riches of the church, and he gave the riches of the church. He brought the poor because he had distributed all the money to the poor.
Yeah.
Right? But the Pantheon is a fascinating place. Now, most people go to Pantheon for a number of reasons, not least of which you have Santa Maria sopra Minerva, which is off to one side, and that is the church in which St. Catherine of Siena, her body is buried.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful church. You have Giolidi's down the block, which has like superb gelato, and most of the tourists go to Giolidi's. Let's be honest. Okay. But the Pantheon was basically a temple honoring the gods. And in the conversion of Rome with Constantine, it became the Church of All Saints. So to this day, it's a Christian church. It's a Catholic church, but very rarely are any sacraments celebrated because it's also very much overrun by tourists.
Mm-hmm.
But the interesting thing about the Pantheon, if you remember, you went to it, yes?
Yes.
It is the single largest unreinforced concrete dome ever made. And it has a hole in the middle, so it rains in the What an interesting concept.
What was the purpose of that hole, though?
I have no. Well, I would think. Now, this is a surmise on my part, so don't hold me to it. But my surmise is for the pagan sacrifices.
Ah, okay.
Is the lifting of the sacrifice, right? It was direct to the gods.
Okay.
Right.
I just assumed it was for the heat and the smell of the people to have someone.
Well, that too could be. That could. That's why incense was invented too.
Yeah.
In the church, right? Because as I said, many farmers would bring their animals into church.
Yeah, you said that before.
Right, and people worry about children crying. Imagine goats bleeding in the back. And Rome's first university, La Sapienza, was founded in 1303. It's the largest in Europe to this day. It's the second largest in the whole world. And it began this whole renaissance of university study in Rome, because all the great universities were founded in the High Middle Ages, and they were all Catholic. And we have lost something in the translation. It's time to regain.
Yes.
But fascinating, no?
Yeah.
Fascinating. So then, if I may finish the tutorial, do we have time before the break?
We do. We have a few minutes. Yep.
Okay. So Italy was unified in 1870 by Garibaldi. That's the year the Papal States were lost. That's when the Pope went into exile and did not really leave the Vatican until 1929 with the Concordat of Mussolini. Most of the ancient city is under the modern city because over the centuries they had built on top. So that's why you have the catacombs. That's why you have the Scavi in Rome. I mean, and you have the temples of Minerva, which are way under street level, which is always the other thing that is just always fascinating in Rome is there is a law that makes it illegal for anyone to interfere with the movement of cats. So if there is a cat it is illegal for you to, quote unquote, hinder or molest the cat in any way. Now, you may say, I think to myself, well, that is like stupid. God forgive me. I mean, I don't particularly like cats, but I don't dislike cats. I mean, it's like cats and they run freely. So, but it is the most ancient form of pest control.
Huh. Oh, right. Yeah.
From ancient times.
Yeah.
And to this day, it still exists. And there are a lot of cats in Rome, a lot.
Yes.
But there's not a lot of vermin. So, I mean, they do their job, so they leave them alone. But it's illegal. So anybody listening, you go to Rome, don't fool around with the cats. Right?
New York could learn something from that, maybe.
Right. And the other two fun facts, one is there is a museum in Rome. You have to go to it. I've never been. I've heard much about it. A pasta museum, a museum only dedicated to pasta. The history of pasta, the variety. It's really kind of a riot to think about.
Oh my gosh.
And the other thing is, I think Italy, but particularly Rome, has now more scooters and motorized bicycles than cars. Simply because of the cost of petroleum and the congestion in the city of Rome.
Yeah. And the streets are so narrow and windy. It makes more sense.
Right. So it's a trip. I have to tell you. And knowing what I know now, just this swirling in my head before I went, it's remarkable. It's just remarkable that we as Americans, I shouldn't say that. I, as an American, thought I appreciated history. But until you go to the ancient capitals of Europe, we are really just children on the world stage when it comes to a country that's 250 years old. Well, we're talking 2,700 years old. It really is sobering, and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. Awesome. Okay. So this is Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network, and we will be right back. Okay, welcome back to Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network. Excellency, my coffee is starting to kick in, and so I just realized that the cats in Rome, I didn't realize that's a good way to rid a city of politicians.
Oh, that they have not had success with. Yeah.
Oh, gosh. Okay. So you went to Rome with 34 seminarians and a dozen or so donors for the seminary.
And supporters, yes. And then we went to Assisi.
Awesome. Yes.
Went to Assisi. Now, Deacon Pat Toole was our retreat master. Did an excellent job. I was in the first day. I wasn't in second or third, but excellent job in the first. And he designed the retreat around the life of St. Francis. Right. So Assisi is in Umbria. Assisi has a long history before there was a St. Francis. But St. Francis is just a seminal figure. When Francis died, for example, it took less than 18 months for Francis to be canonized.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
By popular acclaim. And there's only one saint in the history of the church that was canonized faster. You want to take a stab in the dark?
I can't imagine who would be more popular than Francis ever was.
St. Anthony of Padua.
Oh.
St. Anthony was canonized in less than a year.
Wow.
And you realize St. Anthony, when St. Francis heard St. Anthony, Anthony wanted to be a missionary in Africa, and Francis said, absolutely not. I'm sending you to the universities. That's why he was in Padua. That's where he died. And even though he's Portuguese, and he is Portuguese, the Italians revere Anthony. So the four patrons of Italy are Francis, Anthony, Catherine, and Lucy. Right? So Francis, quick, to understand the city, to understand the religiosity, and to understand the retreat that Pat had offered, and just the appreciation of this alter Christus, which is, there are some spiritual writers who say that the two most seminal figures in Christianity, from a spiritual point of view, not for other points of view, like St. Peter's obviously is towering, but the two are Paul and Francis.
Hmm.
And when you go there, you could understand why. First, the natural beauty of Assisi, the fact that Francis had a tremendous love for the created order is almost infectious because of the area that was there. But the tour guide that we had gave an insight into Francis that I didn't really understand before. So as you know, he was the son of a merchant, very wealthy family. His father was impossible in many ways, but impossible in the sense of that he was a person who was just totally wrapped up with his status and wealth. Simple as that. There was no other way to get around it. And he wanted Francis to follow in his footsteps. So in the medieval age, when Francis was born, there were I'm going to say the merchants,
Mm-hmm.
and then there were the knights.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So you could be super wealthy, but you always aspired to be a knight because it was social strata. And therefore, Francis's father wanted Francis to become a knight. And he tried, right? And we know the story, right?
Yes.
It didn't quite work out.
Right.
But it was in the imprisonment that Francis undertook. See, because there were, again, in Middle Ages, every town was its own entity, and therefore it was very common that they would go to war. And so Assisi went to war, and I forget it was with Perugia or not. But in that war, Francis went out in battle and was captured. A lot of his friends were killed, and he was imprisoned for 1 year. And his father refused to pay the ransom because he thought Francis had embarrassed his family by losing the battle. And Francis was tortured, and Francis saw atrocities against other prisoners, many of whom were killed. That began his conversion. But he came back, and being, stubborn, he still wanted to become a knight. And it was an encounter with the leper. And I missed that, I must confess, because Sunday and Monday we're visiting the churches that commemorate these things, these events in Francis' life. But when he met the leper, that was the moment. Now, leprosy is Hansen's disease. At the time, they had no idea what it was. They knew it was infectious. And so if someone was diagnosed with leprosy, then there would be a solemn procession led by the altar servers, the altar boys, the priest of the village, and the person would be led with his family behind him. He'd be shown to the outskirts of the city, and he would be left a clapper. Right? So he had to clap every time another person was in his presence and scream out, "Unclean, unclean." And when Francis returned to Assisi one day, he encountered the leper. And in that moment of grace, he realized that the leper was no different than he was. And that in his poverty, Francis was looking upon the Lord Jesus. And so he got off his horse and he went over to the leper and he kissed his hands and embraced him and gave him clothing. And that was the first time probably in many years where the leper had any human contact. And that, from that point on, Francis was on the road to extraordinary sanctity. And soon after that, his father, furious, had him imprisoned in his own home because they would have like those, I was going to say homegrown prisons. And his mother released him. His father, even more furious, confronted Francis. And that was the famous becoming naked, right? And where we stayed in the pensione, monastery, whatever you want to call it, run by the sisters, the place where that happened was literally outside the door to the right, which is being restored. But you see, Francis, at that moment, he did not renounce his father. He renounced his father's wealth, but his father could not understand the difference.
Right.
And Francis's father literally wanted to attack him, and the people held him back. And the beautiful line is when he took all his clothes and handed them back to his father, he said, "Now I have a new father in heaven and a new mother, who is the church." And the bishop took his robe off and wrapped Francis. And because of that, the bishop gave Francis protection in the Middle Ages. Otherwise, Francis would literally have been killed by his father and not been prosecuted. Right? So to literally come out in the morning for the 2 mornings I was there and just stare at the place where Francis had this moment of just profound conversion just gave me so much pause in reflection and prayer.
Yeah.
And I say to myself, have I given everything to Christ like Francis did? Right? Can I be totally naked and say, my father is in heaven and my mother is the church? I'm not sure I've fully arrived at that point. I'm not sure many people have.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's amazing. As you're telling the story of St. Francis, I can't help but contrast that with the story of the prodigal son. And, you're saying Francis's father, he couldn't tell the difference between rejecting his wealth and him. So he identifies with his own wealth.
Exactly.
And then.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
So right next to this place in Assisi is one of the churches of Assisi in which Blessed Carlo Acutis is found. And I must tell you, the lines to go in and visit Carlo were just astounding. Absolutely astounding. And because I lived there, like for the time being, and I get up super early, I got in just as the church had just opened at 7:00. There were only 4 people there. And I thought Carlo, the appearance of Carlo was natural, but it's not. So there's a wax face over him, but it looks real. I mean, it looks natural. I was shocked when I learned. I thought it was until somebody told me, no, there's a wax max. And we were fortunate because I think it was by this time he was being transported to Rome. The body was being transported to Rome for the Jubilee. Pier Giorgio also was going to Rome, right, for the young people to venerate there. So that's just outside the door from where we were staying, right? So of course, Francis lived. He had some benefactors who many were women. He had his early followers. Anyway, when Francis died, interesting, something I did not know. When Francis died, he traveled all over because he was a mendicant. Right? When he died, he asked for 2 things. The first was to die on Mother Earth, which he did on his back. The second was, for all his poverty, he did have one item he loved very much when he was able to receive it as a gift. And they call it now by many names, but one of the names is the bread of St. Francis. But actually what it is a shortbread, sweet bread, made with raisins and almonds. And one of his benefactors would give Francis periodically one of those. And the loaf was like, it's not tiny, it's big.
Oh, wow.
It's big. And so I brought one home and ate it on the plane. Truth be told, it didn't quite make it to the United States. Yeah, so that's my penance. But so I thought to myself, that's neat, though. Even the saint who renounced everything still has those natural, wholesome cravings.
Right.
It wasn't Oreos, but I mean, it wasn't perfect. But I mean, it was just right. So we celebrated Mass at the tomb. Now, of course, even the history of the tomb is fascinating, right? Because Francis's body was moved twice in history. Once, because in the Middle Ages, it had to be hidden. Because what people did is they dug the tombs out of the saints and took their body parts for relics. Right. But Francis was totally intact, and he was hidden for years. So you have the Basilica of St. Francis, which is on one side of the Assisi, and Santa Chiara was on the other side, St. Clare. So you have three levels, right? You have the major basilica, you have the original church, and then you have the tomb that the Franciscans built, right? And it was really a site, which I didn't know. It was a site where, in medieval times, if you were a thief, a murderer, or whatever else you were, you went to, right, the hill of hell. That's where you were buried. You were buried as a reprobate. And when Francis wanted a place to gather his little huts where they lived on their own, that's where he chose to live, among the reprobates, among the thieves and the murderers. And now it's called the Hill of Heaven after they built the upper basilica. Again, a sign of the remarkable sanctity of this man. And so the tomb of Francis is in a simple carved granite box. And because I am a bishop, they gave us the privilege, because only bishops have the privilege to celebrate Mass at the tomb itself. And so the group was able to celebrate Mass in that tomb.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was the thrill of a lifetime, I must confess. It's just, because remember, I told the story about my mother and all the rest. It was in that lower chapel. So in a sense, it almost felt as if there was closure now, finally, spiritually, from that episode with my mother, which was 14 years before. It's just remarkable. The other thing that struck me in the Basilica of St. Francis, and there's many of those. Again, the guide said, because there was such fascination with Francis, there were tremendous amounts of medieval artists that came, all for free, to decorate the basilica. And all the records were meticulously kept by the Franciscans. And then when Napoleon came through and made the basilica stable, he took all the records and destroyed them. So there are many people contributed. They're not exactly sure how many or who they were. I mean, the great ones like Giotto and all the rest, that they certainly know. But what struck me is how much of the frescoes have been lost to the earthquakes, especially in 1997. And one part of the basilica was totally reconstructed, the frescoes. So what you see there, you would say, wow, they were well preserved, but they were reconstructed.
Okay.
And because of digital photography, that can be done, but they're not quite original, right? It was a 5.5 magnitude earthquake on the 26th of September, 1997, right? So when we arrived in Assisi, before you go up the hill, there is Santa Maria degli Angeli. And in the Santa Maria, it's a basilica. There is the Porzuncola, which is the third church Francis rebuilt, if I could put it that way.
Yeah.
Right? And that was the place where the Benedictines gave to Francis with the understanding, gave all of it with the understanding that it would be considered the headquarters of the Franciscan order, which is technically what it is, even to this day. Right? And when you look at that little chapel, you've been, yes?
Yes.
Right? And you saw the transito, the in the corner.
The transito.
Right. So when you're looking at the Porzoncola, you keep going straight into the apse. Off to the right, there's a small little chapel.
Okay.
And that's the transito. That is the place where Francis died.
Oh, I don't think I remember that.
Yeah. That is where he died. Right. And then there's also the rose garden outside, with the miracle of the boy who fell and the thorns disappeared and they became a bed of roses to break his fall. Again, it was some remarkable stuff, I must confess.
Yes.
It's just, and of course, St. Clare, also very wealthy woman, was taken by the poverty and the radical simplicity of Frances and renounced everything. And so she was given, right, the Church of San Damiano. That's where the Poor Clares began. And the Church of San Damiano is the place where Jesus said where Jesus said to Francis, Francis, rebuild my church because it is in ruins. And look what the effect of one man on the whole history of the church. Right? We talk about the sanctity of life.
Yeah.
Could I speculate a bit? If Francis were alive today, there'd be a cadre of psychologists and psychiatrists say, this guy's out of his mind. Let's give him this, that, and the other. Let's medicate this guy, because they have no spiritual background to speak of.
Right.
And yet and so the question that was haunting me in that, the flight back, which felt like it was forever. How many St. Francis's are alive today in the 21st century? And they're not being taken seriously because they're different, or they're odd, or just medicate them. The Lord's bountiful in his grace.
Yes. And
so thanks be to God, Francis lived in a time that saw things through a spiritual prism. As odd as sometimes he acted. Because the guide said, the famous, the two things, if I may, if we have time. Do we have time?
We do.
Yeah. The first is his, preaching to the birds. People say this guy's crazy talking to birds. But what the guide reminded us was, Francis was very, he was not a decisive figure. He was not a super intellectual figure. And therefore, at times, he was very indecisive. And he did most of his work by discernment, not by decision. And when the brothers gathered around Francis, he would ask their discernment. But when he still was not settled, he would go off into nature, where he had a tremendous bond. And the birds would come to him. And that was the sign of the decision he was to make. So he spoke to them, right, in thanksgiving, because they were sent by the Father to give Francis the reassurance he needed for the decisions he had to make. It's a beautiful fresco of Francis preaching. The other is, when you were at Basilica of St. Francis, the most authentic image of Francis that we have is in that basilica. So when you go down the upper church and you get to where the altar is, if you look right at the very first fresco, there is the Madonna on her throne with the child Jesus and all the rest. And this fresco was the first time that the Renaissance writers, the birth of Renaissance too, that they depicted their figures with human emotion, not like the Byzantine, like, for example, at the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception, where he looks like with real emotion. And there's a figure next to it. And historians all agree that is the most accurate historic depiction of Francis. He was small, he was frail, and he was no raving beauty, if I could put it that way. Okay? He was of average looks.
Yeah.
Versus all the way we depict him in art through this as if he was like, a model.
Right.
No. But that tells the story, I think.
Yes.
That tells the story of the lowly toppling the great.
Yes. Yeah. And he's so charismatic, it obviously wasn't anything natural. It was something internal.
Exactly. And the Cathedral of San Rufino, which is the Cathedral of Assisi, which is kind of like in the middle, is the place where both Francis and Clare were baptized. And the font's still there. So it was for all the seminarians learning about this, going through it was just, for me, it was tremendously rejuvenating spiritually. For the seminarians, I think it gave them tremendous thought.
Yeah.
And it was just a beautiful, beautiful experience. And I am grateful to the family who donated 3/4 of the cost for everyone.
Wow.
Because I'm sure it shaped their life. It will shape their priesthood for sure. Anyway, So that was my week.
Amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, it really was. It was. Any questions, my friend?
No. So when do the seminarians, have they returned? Because you came
Yes,
back early.
they came back Tuesday. I came back Sunday. They came back Tuesday. Thank God everybody arrived. Although I must confess, not everybody came back. Right? So 2 seminarians are now staying in Assisi for Italian and going off to the North American College. So when they left on the pilgrimage, they left home for 22 months. They will not be back.
Wow.
Another group of the seminarians went to Rome because they have flexibility because they wanted to join the Jubilee of Youth, and they'll come back next week.
Okay.
Some are coming back August 9th. So in the end, I'm not exactly sure how many came home, but my guess is about half came home.
Yeah.
And the others have, you're young, they're going through, well, what do I know what they're doing? I don't ask. I send our lady to take care of them. That's basically it.
Well, what a blessing to be able to do that in your formative years as a, budding priest.
Without doubt. So we're going to do it in 3 years. I already decided. I told them before I left.
And if any of the seminarians who went this year are still there, will they get to go again?
Yes, of course. Yes, of course.
So I have time to still sign up and join.
Of course, absolutely. Because next year we go nowhere. The year after is World Youth Day. In Seoul, South Korea.
Right.
Then the year after that will be our trip. And I said to them, what I'd like to do this time is go back to Europe, and we're going to walk in the footsteps of Our Lady. So we will go to Fatima, we will go to Lourdes, and then we'll go one more place, either Medjugorje or Knock, depending on how. That is the next trip in 3 years.
Wow. Amazing.
And because we're admitting, I think, 10 seminarians this fall, I think we will have in September 42 seminarians.
Wow. Amazing.
And the funny thing is, in the retreat, they had to choose their roommates, and almost all of them chose a roommate who was in the different track of formation. So we have the Redemptoris Mater guys in the missionary track, and then what I'm going to call the more traditional track. And they paired up one by one to get to know each other and to grow in friendship with each other. And that made me extremely happy.
That is awesome. Yeah. That's awesome. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
It's great. Okay, so we need to take a break. So this is Let Me Be Frank on the Veritas Catholic Network, and we will be back with a listener question. Okay, welcome back to Let Me Be Frank with Bishop Frank Caggiano. Excellency, this is this week's question. It says, I noticed that the beautiful statues of Mary and Jesus and angels are gone from outside the Catholic Center on Jewett Avenue. Were they moved to your present location or scattered around the diocese?
Well, the answer is they're not at our present location because we're in a commercial building that we rent space from. But the 2 angels actually are going to St. Mary's in Bethel. It's a gift that I gave the parish. And the statues of our Lord and Our Lady are being relocated to our Catholic cemeteries.
Okay.
So that they would have a permanent home there because we couldn't take them with us.
Right.
Those are the final items before we actually close the deal and leave permanently. Yep.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. So if you have questions, you can send them in on social media, or you can email questions@veritascatholic.com. You can find Bishop Frank Caggiano, and also you can find Veritas Catholic Network on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And Let Me Be Frank is brought to you by a grant from Foundations in Faith and the St. Therese Fund for Evangelization. Foundations of Faith is committed to supporting and transforming pastoral ministries in the Diocese of Bridgeport. And to learn more about their work, you can go to foundationsinfaith.org. What an amazing trip, and what a blessing. And for you also to be able to do that with the seminarians. Excellent.
Without a doubt. It was tremendous. I'm very grateful.
Yeah,
I'm very, very grateful. And we're taping on a day that tomorrow then starts year 13 for me.
Oh my gosh, really? Congratulations.
Well, the announcement, was the Feast of St. Ignatius Loyola, another great saint that we could talk about one day.
Yes.
In greater detail. Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, pray for our seminarians. Let's pray. Yes? In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly Father, we give you thanks and praise for your blessings. In our poverty, you grant us so much. We ask that you bless all our seminarians and seminarians throughout the church. Help them to grow in zeal, and holiness. Bless all our young people, especially those who are pilgrims to the Jubilee in Rome. Keep them safe and joyful, and may they have an encounter with the Holy Father that will truly transform their spiritual life. And we ask that you bless all of us. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, my friend, I'll see you next week.
See you, Excellency. Thanks for watching. Before you go, please be sure to subscribe, like, hit the bell, leave a comment down below. All of that stuff helps us reach more souls.